In the silent pre-dawn hours of the early 20th century, the world's great navies were locked in a relentless arms race. The measure of a nation's power was not just its wealth or the size of its army, but the number of colossal steel-plated dreadnoughts it could send to sea. These were the titans of their age, floating fortresses whose guns could level cities from miles away. In the years following the Great War, the United States Navy was determined to hold the line, commissioning a new generation of battleships so powerful they were known as the Big Five. And among them was a ship destined for a career of unbelievable luck, brutal combat, and stubborn resilience. This is the story of the USS Maryland, BB-46, a battleship they would come to call Fighting Mary. The Maryland belonged to the Colorado class, the final and most advanced evolution of the standard-type battleship design that had served the U.S. Navy for years. While her hull and speed were similar to the classes that came before, she and her sisters carried a truly game-changing weapon. In place of the older 12-inch or 14-inch guns, the Colorado class mounted 8 massive 16-inch 45 caliber naval guns, arranged in 4 twin turrets. These weapons could hurl a 2,110-pound, 957-kilogram armor-piercing shell over 20 miles, 32 kilometers. For the first time, the U.S. Navy had battleships that could go toe-to-toe with any rival on the planet, including Japan's formidable Nagato class. When the USS Maryland was commissioned on July 21, 1921, she was, without exaggeration, one of the most powerful warships afloat. For the next 2 decades, her life was one of relative peace, a symbol of American naval prestige. She served as the flagship of the fleet for years, a proud vessel hosting dignitaries and undertaking diplomatic missions. In 1923, she sailed to Rio de Janeiro for the Brazilian Centennial Exposition. In 1925, she embarked on a grand tour across the Pacific, visiting Australia and New Zealand to strengthen ties with those allies, a voyage that tested the endurance of the fleet over thousands of miles of open ocean. 3 years later, she had the honor of carrying President-elect Herbert Hoover on the Pacific leg of his South American goodwill tour. The rest of her time was spent in the familiar rhythm of a peacetime navy, fleet exercises, training maneuvers, and gunnery practice. Life aboard was routine, punctuated by the grand traditions of naval ceremony. But the world was changing. The storm clouds of war were gathering once again, and in 1940, in a move to deter Japanese aggression in the Pacific, the U.S. battle fleet was transferred from its home in California to a new forward base, Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. The morning of December 7, 1941, dawned warm and quiet over the island of Oahu. For the sailors of the U.S. Pacific Fleet, it was just another Sunday. Along the southeastern shore of Ford Island, the titans of the fleet were moored in a line known as Battleship Row. There, the USS Maryland sat peacefully, tied up at berth F5. Crucially, she was moored inboard, a position that placed the battleship USS Oklahoma directly between her and the main channel. It was a simple accident of berthing, a routine arrangement that would, in a matter of minutes, mean the difference between life and death. At 7:55 a.m., the sky over Pearl Harbor tore open. Japanese planes, launched from carriers hundreds of miles away, swarmed over the harbor. The first wave of attackers was composed of Kate torpedo bombers, their primary targets the massive battleships lined up like ducks in a row. For the men aboard the Maryland, the first sign of disaster was the sound of explosions and the sight of water geysers erupting next to the ships around them. Within moments, a series of catastrophic torpedo impacts slammed into the port side of the USS Oklahoma. The venerable battleship, having not been fitted with the latest anti-torpedo bulges, shuddered violently and immediately began to list. Her doom was swift and horrifying. In less than 12 minutes, the Oklahoma rolled completely over, trapping hundreds of her crew inside her dark, inverted hull. But for the Maryland, the tragic fate of her sister ship became an unexpected shield. Tucked away on the inside, her hull was completely protected from the devastating torpedo attack. The Japanese pilots simply couldn't get a clean shot. This single fact spared her from the near instantaneous destruction that befell the Oklahoma, the California, the West Virginia, and the Arizona. Her survival in these first critical moments was a matter of pure, dumb luck. But her fight was just beginning. While she was safe from torpedoes, she was not safe from the dive bombers that followed. As the crew scrambled to general quarters, the ship was rocked by two direct bomb hits. The first was an armor-piercing bomb that struck the forecastle awning, detonating after it punched through the main deck. It blew a jagged hole 22 feet, 7 meters long, and 20 feet, 6 meters wide, creating a chaotic scene of twisted metal and smoke. The second bomb hit the 22-foot deck, exploding and causing flooding in several compartments. Water began to pour into the ship, and she started to settle by the bow, taking on a list. But unlike so many others that day, her crew was able to respond. Damage control parties went to work immediately, fighting fires and containing the flooding. Amidst the chaos, the gunners of the Maryland were demonstrating the spirit that would earn her the nickname Fighting Mary. With the ship's main power knocked out, men frantically worked to get the anti-aircraft batteries firing. Seaman Leslie Short was credited by the ship's captain for climbing to the machine gun nests in the maintop and firing on the attacking planes, becoming one of the very first sailors in the fleet to fight back. Her 5-inch guns and machine guns soon joined the fray, sending streams of fire into the sky, contributing to the desperate defense of the harbor. When the attack finally ended, the scene was apocalyptic. Battleship Row was a graveyard of burning, sinking ships. But next to the overturned hull of the Oklahoma, the USS Maryland, though damaged and down by the bow, was still afloat and still fighting. 4 of her crew had been killed, but the ship herself was alive. She was a survivor. While the nation reeled from the shock of Pearl Harbor, the Navy began the monumental task of salvage and repair. For the Maryland, the road to recovery was remarkably short. Her damage, though serious, was superficial compared to the other battleships. She was able to steam under her own power to the Puget Sound Navy Yard in Washington for full repairs. On February 26, 1942, less than 3 months after the attack that was supposed to cripple the U.S. fleet, the USS Maryland rejoined the war. She was the first of the damaged battleships to return to service, a powerful symbol of American industrial might and unwavering resolve. The war she returned to was a different one. The age of the battleship as the queen of the seas was over, eclipsed by the aircraft carrier. The Maryland and her fellow dreadnoughts now found a new, vital purpose, serving as floating artillery platforms and anti-aircraft screens for the carrier task forces. In June 1942, during the pivotal Battle of Midway, she played a supporting role, patrolling with the backup force, ready to engage any Japanese surface ships that might break through. It was a tense time, but the decisive victory was won by naval aviation, reinforcing the new reality of naval warfare. For the rest of the year and into 1943, she patrolled the waters around Fiji, protecting the vital supply lines to Australia. Her real baptism of fire in this new role came in November 1943, at the invasion of the Tarawa Atoll in the Gilbert Islands. Tarawa was a heavily fortified island, and the task of softening up its defenses fell to the old battleships. For days leading up to the Marine landings, the Maryland hammered the Japanese positions. Her 16-inch guns, once designed to fight other battleships, now systematically pulverized bunkers, gun emplacements, and trenches. The bombardment was terrifying in its intensity, a relentless storm of high-explosive shells that shook the very foundations of the island. While the battle for Tarawa would become infamous for its brutal, bloody fighting on the beaches, the fire support provided by ships like the Maryland was absolutely essential, saving countless American lives by suppressing enemy fire during the critical landing phase. This became her new job, a role she would repeat across the vast expanse of the Pacific. In February 1944, she was at the invasion of Kwajalein in the Marshall Islands, once again providing methodical, crushing fire support. Here, her gunnery was so effective that the landings were carried out with much greater speed and fewer casualties than at Tarawa. Fighting Mary had found her calling in this new war, a workhorse of the island-hopping campaign, methodically blasting a path for the Marines from one fortified island to the next. But her luck wouldn't hold forever. In June 1944, during the pre-invasion bombardment of Saipan, The Maryland was spotted by a Japanese G-4M Betty torpedo bomber. The plane swooped in low and fast, braving the ship's intense anti-aircraft fire to launch its deadly payload. A torpedo slammed into her bow on the starboard side, tearing a massive hole at the waterline. Once again, her crew's training kicked in. Damage control teams leaped into action, isolating the flooded compartments and shoring up bulkheads. Despite the grievous wound, which had sheared away a large section of her bow, the ship remained stable. She had to withdraw from the battle and make the long journey back to Pearl Harbor for repairs. But she had survived a hit that could have been fatal. 2 months later, with a freshly repaired bow, she was back in the fight, participating in the invasion of the Palau Islands in September. Her most dramatic surface engagement, and a moment of sweet revenge for the veterans of Pearl Harbor, came in October 1944 during the colossal Battle of Leyte Gulf. The Japanese Navy, in a desperate last-ditch effort, threw everything it had left into the fight. As part of Admiral Jesse Oldendorf's 7th Fleet Support Force, the Maryland found herself guarding the southern entrance to Leyte Gulf, a passage known as the Surigao Strait. On the night of October 24th, a Japanese fleet under Admiral Shoji Nishimura steamed directly into the trap. Oldendorf had his force of battleships, many of them like Maryland, survivors of Pearl Harbor, arranged in a classic battle line. What followed was one of the last great battleship versus battleship actions in history. As the Japanese ships sailed in a column down the narrow strait, the American fleet performed the textbook naval maneuver known as crossing the T. This allowed the American battleships to bring all of their main guns to bear on the enemy, while the Japanese ships could only fire their forward-facing guns in return. The Maryland's 16-inch guns roared to life, joining a perfectly orchestrated symphony of destruction. Her radar-directed fire was devastatingly accurate. The Japanese flagship Yamashiro was battered into a burning wreck before sinking with almost all hands. Nishimura's force was annihilated. For the sailors of the Maryland and the other Pearl Harbor survivors, it was justice delivered at 2,000 pounds a shell. They had avenged the attack that started their war. Yet, even as the age of the battleship duel came to a close, a new and terrifying threat emerged from the skies: the kamikaze. In late November 1944, while patrolling off Leyte, the Maryland was struck by a suicide attacker. The plane, loaded with explosives, smashed into the ship between turrets number 1 and 2. The resulting explosion and fire killed 31 sailors and inflicted serious damage. But Fighting Mary lived up to her name. Her crew fought the fires, tended to the wounded, and kept the ship operational. Though wounded, she was not out of the fight and proceeded to Pearl Harbor for another round of repairs. After being patched up, she returned to the front lines in time for the largest amphibious assault of the Pacific War, the invasion of Okinawa in April 1945. This was the doorstep to Japan itself, and the resistance was fanatical. The skies were thick with kamikazes. For weeks, the Maryland provided her now expert fire support, blasting caves, bunkers, and enemy troop concentrations. Then, on the evening of April 7th, her luck was tested again. A kamikaze carrying a 550-pound, 250-kilogram bomb dove out of the clouds. Despite a hail of anti-aircraft fire that shredded the plane, the pilot managed to crash directly on top of turret number 3. The bomb detonated, and the turret roof was engulfed in a massive fireball. The blast killed 10 men and wounded many more, turning the armored gunhouse into an inferno. The turret was destroyed, but the battleship's core survivability held. Incredibly, even with one of her main turrets shattered and burning, the Maryland remained on station, continuing her fire support mission for another week before finally departing for repairs. She was in the shipyard at Puget Sound, undergoing her final overhaul, when the news came in August 1945 that Japan had surrendered. Her war was over. She had fought from the first day to the last, surviving bombs, a torpedo, and 2 direct kamikaze hits. Her final mission was one of peace. As part of Operation Magic Carpet, the old battleship, which had been designed for destruction, made 5 voyages between Hawaii and the West Coast, carrying more than 25,000 American servicemen home to their families. It was a fitting final duty for a ship that had endured so much. The USS Maryland was decommissioned on April 3, 1947. She sat in the reserve fleet for over a decade, a silent relic of a bygone era. In 1959, she was sold for scrap. The Titan that had roamed the Pacific, that had witnessed the inferno of Pearl Harbor and delivered retribution at Surigao Strait, was broken up, her steel recycled for a new world she had helped to build. But her legacy remains. She earned 7 battle stars for her service in World War II. Her story is a remarkable testament not just to a fortunate position on a day of infamy, but to the incredible resilience of a well-built ship and the courage of the thousands of men who served on her. She was a workhorse, a survivor, and a fighter to the very end. She was Fighting Mary, the battleship that lived to tell the tale. The story of the USS Maryland is one of incredible resilience, a ship that seemed to cheat death time and time again. But countless other vessels and heroes have their own incredible tales of survival, sacrifice, and sheer determination. What piece of military history, legendary machine, or untold story do you think we should investigate next? Let us know in the comments below. Consider it your mission briefing to us. We read every suggestion and are always looking for the next fascinating topic to bring to light. If you enjoyed this journey through the history of a true naval legend, make sure you are subscribed to the channel. Hitting that button ensures you won't miss our next deep dive into the echoes of warfare and the legends it creates.